Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. It's your host Cole Anderson, as always, and this week I'm coming to you again from the home of a very good friend of mine who happens to be a violin teacher, so that's why you will hear some violin scales in the background while I'm recording this. They're having a lesson at the moment. This video comes after a little bit of a hiatus that I had last week. I didn't have my usual video upload last Friday. Originally, I was planning to put up the recording of my most recent concert performance, but I didn't end up getting the video files in time. In fact, I still haven't received them yet. As soon as I do get those, though, I will upload those, so anyone who didn't get to tune in for the live stream will be able to hear that performance. So today, instead, we're going to be going on with Brahms' late pieces. This is another favorite of mine. Well, practically every piece of Brahms' shorter works is a favorite of mine, but this one is especially interesting and moving. It's quite elusive emotionally, and you can get that impression very clearly from the indications that Brahms has given at the very beginning. So he writes grazioso e giocoso, which is graceful but humorous, molto piano e leggero, so very light and very, very soft. So it's a very interesting combination that it's kind of humorous and playful, but at the same time very, very soft and intimate, and it's also very graceful and leggero. Not an easy thing to nail exactly, and people have a lot of different ways of going about playing this piece. If you go and listen to different interpretations by famous pianists, one of the more interesting ones that you might hear, which departs from the road most traveled in this interpretation, is the various recordings by Arthur Rubinstein. He actually plays this piece in a much more almost legato fashion when there are no articulations marked. So what I'm talking about here is that Brahms only says leggero, and then he gives no articulation for most of the first part of this piece. Later on, he will mark staccati for certain notes as well as slurs for notes that are meant to be played very legato. But it's not exactly clear what leggero might mean for articulation for the rest of the piece. And most people interpret it as being kind of a light staccato, which is also more or less the way I've done it in this recording. And from other examples, I think that you could make the argument that that is oftentimes what leggero means when composers use it in this time. Kind of a gentle staccato, not super, super short, but also definitely not connected. So when Brahms does not write a slur or a staccato, he definitely, I think, is suggesting something which is neither legato nor completely staccato. Exactly what that means, though, is of course up to everyone's interpretation. For some people, it'll be a little bit more sticky, a little bit more close to a legato feel. For others, it'll be a little bit more bouncy and light. Since we know it's supposed to be graceful but also humorous, there is really a range that could work, I think, for this piece. So that's worth keeping in mind as you're trying to form your interpretation. This is another interesting form. It's so short. It's only about a minute and a half. Basically monothematic. We have this theme at the opening, which is then developed. There's a very brief kind of recap of the opening, but with the rhythm altered a little bit. So we get this very lovely version of the opening where it's in hemiola, where you get quarter notes across the bar. The meter is 6/8, so a 6/8 is usually felt in a big 2 groups of 3/8 notes, but here Brahms kind of uses his favorite technique to confuse that underlying rhythm a little bit. It's a very beautiful effect at this moment. So here's the opening. And here's where the theme comes back in hemiola form. And this is quite interesting because you'll also hear that the main theme, it uses the technique of hemiola as well. The way that Brahms constructs this main theme, he uses the same melodic pattern 3 times in a row. So I've circled them here. The notes E, G, A, G forms one cycle of this pattern, and you'll see that he repeats it 3 times in a row. So the second time starting on the last 8th note in the bar, and then the next time it's starting on the second beat. So that also creates a subtly humorous, inflected feeling to this melody, as the structural joins in the melody part are overlapping the way that the left hand is written, which is very dependable with the lowest note always on the downbeat. So this humorous and wistful mood at the beginning, this very gracious feeling, gives way at times to a much sharper kind of edge to the sound. And you'll notice that Brahms starts writing staccati as well as this starts to happen. There are a few little tricky items of interpretation in this piece I'll just want to highlight very briefly, because they are things which I frequently hear students get wrong. At the very end of this piece, in the little codetta, it's worth noting that Brahms has written a piano way back here, and there is no other dynamic until the forte on the second to last chord. Frequently, you'll hear people play this ascending chordal arpeggio pattern with a big crescendo and then you reach forte. But no, it's supposed to be soft all the way through until you get to the forte. It's much more humorous and in character for the piece that way. Another little mistake, which has to do with a technical difficulty, happens in this same section. So you see Brahms has written this very lovely and humorous arpeggio here. It's such a great moment where this arpeggio just kind of bubbles up out of nowhere and seems to wipe the slate clean before we get the ending. And what you'll usually hear, because there's a poco retard before this, people will play the first 3/16 notes of this arpeggio a little slower, and then they'll hit the tempo once they've got the arpeggio in the left hand out of the way. But I think that's actually a mistake. That makes this passage sound a little bit halting, a little bit stuttering. I think you should follow exactly the markings as you can see them printed in this edition. So you can see that un poco retard is followed by these dashes which end right before the first 16th note. So you need to come back to tempo right there, just where I've written a tempo. It's a little bit more tricky because of the coordination with your left hand, but if you practice it a bit and you get it just right, it sounds so much fun and so much better that way. So for any of you talented amateur pianists out there who want to learn this piece, it's worth noting that it is significantly harder than it looks. You just look at the notes and it doesn't seem like it's that difficult. It doesn't look like it's that fast. But actually, with all the jumping around in the left hand combined with this kind of tricky chordal texture in the right hand, it's surprisingly difficult to get this to sink into your hands. I certainly found that to be the case as I was working on it. I was expecting it to come very, very quickly. The first two pieces in this set came quite quickly, but this one actually took quite a little bit of time, so until I could feel like I knew my way around and I didn't have to think about where my hands were going. There's also one particularly nasty passage, difficulty-wise. These two bars right here are extremely difficult to get right, partly because both the left hand and the right hand are having to jump a full octave to get to their respective places, back and forth, and it's at a point where there's actually an intensification of musical rhetoric. So the instinct is actually to go faster here, and so it's very, very difficult to get this exactly right at that tempo. I recommend doing a style of practice where you play one half of the bar and then stop on the first note of the next half of the bar. So starting in this measure, you'd play the first 4 notes and stop. You'd stop on that chord that's in the second half of the bar, and just try to get that so that you can play the 8th notes really evenly and land on that next note really cleanly. And once you can do that, then try to do the next group of 4 notes. So you're always overlapping to the next downbeat. That's actually the most efficient way to train yourself to get these jumps exactly correct. Then once you can do that, you can try to do one whole measure at a time, stopping on the next downbeat, and so forth, and then put 2 bars together. So if you do want to practice this, just take your time and be patient. It does take a little longer than you might expect. Great, I think that's basically it. Stay tuned for the complete performance of this very short but very lovely piece. And stay tuned next week. I'm planning to put up the Rhapsody to finish off Opus 119. If I do get the audio and video for my most recent live performance, I might put that up instead, but it just depends on, I guess, how I'm feeling. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the complete performance. It's Cole Anderson signing off, so take care until next time.